the task of bringing Australians home and facilitating international arrivals is one of the most difficult and challenging through this crisis. And it's of course presented itself with challenges in a number of different ways for different states over the course of this year. Now, at every one of those junctures, there have been reviews as to whether any of the processes need to be tightened even further, such as more frequent testing or the way in which isolation is managed and occurs. And I've got no doubt that there will be a close look by health authorities at this matter and whether there are further tightenings that need to be applied in relation to keeping Australians safe while still finding means to safely let those Australians seeking to come back into the country.
Do you believe they should be tightened as things stand?
I believe, as always through this, that we have to follow the health advice. That the health advice is about managing the risks in all of the circumstances, and that has got us through this year incredibly well. Australia stands in one of the best places right around the globe in terms of the health outcomes and the economic outcomes, and that's a result of the fact that governments have worked together with experts to get the right outcomes.
But there does appear, though, that something needs to be done. You had a worker, a cleaner last week, who became infected by working at a hotel where airline staff were. So there does appear to be some problems in this realm. Do you acknowledge that? And if so, does that need to be tightened?
Well, look, there are obviously always improvements that can potentially be looked at around practices, and I have no doubt they will be looked at. That is why we continue to task the health officials to look at every single outbreak and instance to understand how we can better manage the risks and better eliminate as many of those risks as possible. And so if there are improved practices for air crew, then they ought to be applied in line with the health advice of the day.
Do you believe that airline workers should be vaccinated first whenever we get the vaccine?
Look, I think the short answer there is yes, that alongside obviously other higher risk occupations, so clearly we have those working in the front line in hospitals and healthcare and aged care. We also have highly vulnerable populations such as older people who have a more negative outcome in terms of what happens when they get COVID. So that's the type of triaging process that's underway. And those who work in close proximity to large numbers of people, like airline workers, would be in the mix there around those early stages, probably before we get to a full mass population vaccination program.
OK, you've got the budget update coming up later on today that you'll be there with the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg announcing that. Can you confirm that the deficit for this year is going to be less than $200 billion? And if so, is that a pre-Christmas gift for our budget?
Well, look, I'll hand down the budget update with Josh later today, and so we'll confirm all of the details and the data at that time. But encouragingly, the Australian economy has been recovering better than expected. We've still got a long way to go in terms of getting things anywhere back to normality. This is a long process in dealing with COVID, just as we were discussing, and there are plenty of uncertainties and risks that come along. But we've seen more than 650,000 jobs created over the last 5 months. That's great news for those Australians, those families, those businesses who are putting Australians back into work. But of course, it also has a flow-through effect in fewer Australians on JobKeeper, more Australians back into paid employment, and that is something that clearly helps the budget bottom line and helps us to drive that type of growth across the economy.
Iron ore, the price of iron ore has no doubt been of great help to our budget at the moment. How long can we rely on iron ore prices to stay where they are?
So we have always prudently budgeted when it comes to commodities like iron ore, and that's an approach that we will continue. In the budget handed down just 72 days ago, we projected that the iron ore price, although it was running over $100, and over the last month it's been averaging, I think, around $132 US, we projected that would taper down to some $55. So we've taken that conservative approach consistently. It's served us well to date. And we will maintain that type of prudent, careful approach. OK,
just an update on those coal ships, Minister, if you wouldn't mind. We're seeing some pictures that are emerging from staff in particular, from workers who are on board those ships. They're sending out messages on social media as well. Have you got an update on those ships that are carrying coal that are parked off China at the moment?
We do know that some have cleared or moved on in terms of the goods either being unloaded in China or being approved for transportation elsewhere. These are issues that are unusual in the sense that the Australian exporters get paid for their coal once the ship leaves port in Australia, and so essentially it changes hands at that point. The shipping companies themselves and the crews are rarely Australian, but we've been working with those other countries in terms of representations into China, pointing out the impact upon crews, the unfairness in relation to the treatment there. And we hope that China will continue to resolve this. But again, there's some way to go there. There are still a number of vessels that we know are in this situation. We'd urge China to treat the shipping companies and the crews with respect, noting that the transaction, as I say, has predominantly already taken place from an Australian perspective.
OK, so how many are left as things stand at the moment?
We don't have a precise figure, as I say. These aren't Australian ships and they're not on Australian waters, but we understand it could still be in the order of 60 or so. Right, OK. That's still quite a few. It sure is. And look, this is part of the behaviours and actions that leave us so deeply disappointed. What's prompted us in terms of our defence of Australian farmers and businesses to take the action of initiating the process of the independent umpire and the World Trade Organisation having a look at China's actions, particularly in relation to our barley industry. It's why we continue to make representations in Beijing, in Canberra, as strongly as we possibly can. But ultimately, these are actions by China, either of the Chinese government of goods coming into China or of the Chinese government in Chinese waters. And so we can't control what they do, but we are certainly working with international partners to urge them to show respect to the crews and the shipping companies who find themselves in these situations. Yeah, I mean, you're going to the WTO over barley, but that whole process can take years. So what are you going to do to help our barley producers in the meantime? Yeah, it's not a quick process. We wish it were faster, and it's a process that we've used successfully in some cases. And a good example is with Canada and a wine industry dispute we had with them. We went to the WTO, but in the interim, we actually sat down, worked through the issues and resolved them. And we continue to urge China to go down that path rather than having to go through years of lawyers battling it out at the WTO. But if you believe in having rules and independent umpire, you should call them in when you think something wrong has been done, and that's precisely what we're doing, consistent with the approaches we've taken with other like-mindeds. In the interim, it's about helping our farmers and exporters get into other markets. China's not the only country we've done a trade deal with in recent years. We've done them with Japan, with Korea, with Mexico, with Canada, with Vietnam, with Indonesia. These are all opportunities for us, and we are working not only in those markets but in the Middle East and with new trade deals bound in negotiation in Europe, the United Kingdom, with India, all about trying to help make sure that farmers and exporters can pivot their product elsewhere. But that's all going to take time. That's going to take a long time. Meanwhile, you're looking at billions of dollars that's going to be affected for our barley producers here in Australia. So is there potential for you to be providing more financial support for them in the meantime? Look, indeed, China's decisions are not without consequences and negative impacts for Australian businesses. That has to be acknowledged, and as I've said throughout the course of this year, the risk profile of doing business with China has changed. And now these are commercial decisions that businesses undertake in terms of who they trade with, where they sell to. Our job as a government is to give them maximum help in terms of the access to markets, which is what our trade agreements do, the work through Austrade and our diplomatic network to then help to secure contracts. We've been doing that through the course of this year, and we are seeing markets that hadn't previously taken Australian barley doing so in greater numbers, markets such as Saudi Arabia, and we want to see that sort of trend continue, and that's what we're working with the industry to achieve. But these are all disruptions. I mean, and are you going to still be Trade Minister beyond this weekend? And if not, then that's going to be another disruption. Well, the PM has made clear for some time there will be a reshuffle. I took on the finance portfolio when Matthias left, and I would anticipate that there will be a new Trade Minister. But I can assure Australian farmers and exporters that as Finance Minister, I'll maintain a very keen interest in trade matters, and will work hand in glove with the new Trade Minister to make sure that we have a very smooth handover in relation to all of the relationships, which don't just exist at minister to minister level, but of course, importantly, across all of our network of officials around government, and then most critically, the industry and commercial links that make business happen.
Who do you like to see as your replacement?
That one will be one that the Prime Minister can announce. Right, I'll announce my EFO with the Treasurer today. The PM can announce the reshuffle.